Welcome back, weirdos and weirboos, to the channel Doge, where today I'm doing another match review, and despite the difficulty in finding a good match to review recently, I think I found one. You see, if you weren't aware, ever since the update that added perks just recently, where sometimes when you move around in time on the replay viewer, if someone has a perk selected, it just kicks you out of Overwatch and you just have to restart the whole game, which is really annoying. And if you didn't know, I tend to just find these games on Overwatch University, a subreddit where people often do request VOD reviews. So there haven't been as many to pick out from on the Overwatch University subreddit as usual, because of the obvious fact that, like, you know, with these bugs with the replay viewer, it's a bit frustrating to use it right now. That being said, I think we got lucky here, because I think we just very quickly struck gold. You see, although we have reviewed VODs from Kiriko players before, I don't believe they actually played Kiriko in any of them yet. And I'm not gonna lie, I've been dying to do a VOD review on a Kiriko specifically for a while now. And I'll admit, I'll be fully transparent here. While I do intend to remain fair-handed here, it's no secret I really hate the character, even if they're still a character I've had to play a decent amount just because they're so versatile. But I admit to having some ulterior motives here. You see, I've got a lot of pet peeves that I see about the way that a lot of people go about playing Kiriko that I feel like would be very easy to fix, but people simply seem to stubbornly stick to certain behaviors which I think really don't help them in playing Kiriko. And so I was pretty confident that the very first VOD I saw with Kiriko, I would be seeing basically all of these tendencies that wind me up, and yeah, I was right. And again, that isn't an attack at specifically this person, because, again, it seems like half the Kirikos I see on Overwatch in general do this stuff. Either way, I'll start explaining exactly what I mean once we get into the actual match, so let's do that. To start, let's just take a look at the very first team fight uninterrupted. Don't worry, it is not very long. So before I continue, I do want to make it clear that the point of this isn't to say everything that happens in these team fights is all your fault, and actually it is just you and everyone else in your team was carrying and you're so bad. That is not the case. There are plenty of other people really dropping the ball in this game. That being said, obviously if I just spend the whole time complaining about your teammates, it's not really very constructive. So I am going to focus a little bit more on what you could have done since this is your VOD. Either way, to begin with, it's a bit of a mess, so there's a lot of places we could start, but I just want to get straight to the biggest thing that winds me up that I see in this gameplay. This is probably my biggest pet peeve that I see with a lot of people who play Kiriko. I've made a point before of very rarely complaining about the aim of people that I cover in these videos, because I rarely think complaining about the aim of these players is very helpful. I mean, you can get better aiming as you play, but you can't just magically snap your fingers and be told some magic words that suddenly make you click heads. It's kind of a bit of a you got it or you don't situation, and the only way you can get it if you don't have it is just a whole lot of practice. There might be some small techniques on the side you can use to improve your aim a little bit, but not usually significantly. That being said, sometimes the reason people miss their shots isn't because they can't aim. Sometimes it is, and this might sound like the same thing, but pay attention, it isn't, it's slightly different. It is because they shoot before they think. Or sometimes they don't even think at all, they just shoot blindly. So what do I mean here? Well, healing Ofudas. I see this a lot. I'm sure you're aware that Kiriko's healing Ofudas auto-aim. Even if you don't correctly aim them, so long as you're somewhere in the vicinity of your target, they will become golden and home towards their target. For this reason, it is very easy to heal consistently with Kiriko. And based off of what I'm seeing in this gameplay, while obviously I'm not going to lie to you and sugarcoat it and say that your aim's amazing, I also have seen worse. This isn't the most terrible aim I've seen in my life. I know with this level of aim, you are capable of landing your healing. But I took the liberty of looking at this very first, very quick team fight and counting literally every Ofuda you throw and how many of them actually connected to a teammate. If you were curious, you threw 80 healing Ofudas and only 22 of them actually reached a teammate to heal them. That means that you are healing about 4 times slower than you should be, for no other reason than you're not even really trying to aim with them. And again, that's not like an insult to your actual skill at the game, but when I look at where these Ofudas are going, I mean, look at this. You're throwing them into walls, you're throwing them at the floor, and there's always an outside chance I'm being too charitable, but I personally don't really believe that your aim is actually that bad, that you're not capable of putting the crosshair on the characters. Especially because while it is stupid to throw them into the wall, a lot of times when you are throwing the Ofudas into the wall, if the wall wasn't there, you would actually be dead on. Your crosshair's almost perfectly on the right target, it's just there's a wall there and you're not paying attention. So probably first and most importantly, pay attention to where you're actually throwing your healing Ofudas. Again, this isn't a thing of you are incapable of connecting your healing Ofudas. You are definitely capable of this. It is literally just that you would consider aiming your healing Ofudas not important, because it's easy. And if you could not dedicate any attention to throwing them correctly and still get them to hit their target, that would be fine. But clearly what's really happening here is you think that the healing Ofudas are easy enough that you don't even have to try to aim them, and yet when you don't try to aim them, you miss like every single one. And this isn't just this team fight, it's throughout the entire game. About 3/4 of the healing Ofudas you throw are just thrown at walls or the ground. Every single time you see a blue paper, you need to slap yourself in the face and go, what am I doing? No, pay attention. Because with few exceptions, like maybe this point where you teleported in on the venture, you landed 6 out of 10 Ofudas, you could have landed all 10. But honestly, this I understand missing a couple. This is very quick, there's not a lot of time to react, and they're right in your face. Not to mention, this is a great example of what I mean about this isn't you not being able to aim, this is you not even trying to aim. Because in this situation where you're clearly panicked and actually trying with your aim, you landed 60% of your healing Ofudas, which still isn't ideal, but that's a massive upgrade from 25%. You literally achieved more than double the healing you were achieving before, you know, percentage-wise. Even in a situation where it is literally objectively significantly more difficult to land your healing here, just because you actually paid attention to where you're throwing your Ofudas. I know I spent a while on just this point, but I really want to drive it in. Because healing people by just throwing them healing Ofudas is practically free value on Kiriko, and you really don't want to be throwing away that free value. It's absolutely devastating to your potential. Not to mention, as Kiriko, your ultimate is practically an instant win the team fight button and is one of the most devastating abilities in the entire game, and the most consistent and safe way to farm it is to consistently heal people. So you're not just missing out on healing numbers on the scoreboard, you're missing out on ult charge you could use to flip team fights if you're not landing this healing. Just a quick little side point I want to add on now that I've edited this section. I've now counted every healing Ofuda you threw over the course of this game, whether it was a miss, whether it was a hit, or a third category, whether it did technically reach its target, but the target was already full HP and therefore couldn't be healed, meaning the healing Ofuda still did nothing even though you didn't miss. So first of all, that third category was added just because I felt like I kind of had to. It might not be a huge amount, but it's nearly 10% of your healing Ofudas. And I do feel like it's fair for me to count them separately just because I want to acknowledge these aren't ones that you outright just missed. And in fact, in some cases, I wouldn't really say it's your fault that these healing Ofudas don't heal. I wouldn't say it's a misplay. There are situations as Kiriko where the best thing you can do is to pre-heal. Start throwing healing Ofudas at someone who's already full health because you know they're about to turn a sketchy corner and they might die for turning it. So you might as well make sure the healing Ofudas are already mid-air and on the way to pre-heal them, so that the healing will already be there by the time they need it, even if they don't need healing right now. But of course, sometimes they turn the corner and they don't get shot, in which case, obviously the papers go right through them. And the fact that they didn't get healed isn't your fault and it wasn't a misplay from you, it was just you were preparing for a danger that didn't end up being a problem. Not every time you throw a healing Fuda at someone who doesn't need healing is it actually a misplay. Unfortunately, this is a bit of a context-sensitive thing. But I will add 2 other things onto that. For one, there are plenty of times, it seems at least, that you are unaware the person you're throwing healing Ofudas at is full HP, and it doesn't look like you're trying to pre-heal them on purpose, it just looks like you're unaware that they don't need healing. There's also some times where you're pre-healing someone when I think you could be doing something better, particularly when other people who are actually hurt actually need healing, and you're busy pre-healing someone else. That's something you should keep an eye on. And of course, in those contexts, it would be that your poor awareness has made it so you don't know there are more important things to do, and so it's not necessarily that pre-healing is inherently a bad idea, you're just picking a bad time to do it. Again, because this one's just very messy and context dependent, I think it's fair to put it in its own separate category, but at the end of the day, it's still true that only 20% of your healing Ofudas are actually doing anything. Lastly, I just want to quickly acknowledge one extra point. In your defense, there are some times where I can tell from the gameplay, I don't even think you think there's a great chance of your healing Ofudas hitting, but you're still doing the right thing by throwing them, because all you're doing is coming back from spawn or something anyway. There's nothing better for you to do, so even if it's unlikely for the teammates to walk into the healing Ofudas, you may as well just throw them out and see if anyone eats them up, because there's nothing else you can do right now. You may as well just throw them out and see if you get lucky. So I'm not here to tell you that that's wrong. I mean, it doesn't tend to have a huge impact, but there's no cost to doing it, so there's nothing wrong with doing it. Ultimately, I just still counted those as misses because it's a judgment call from me whether to say you were actually trying to hit that or whether you were just throwing them out because there's nothing better to do. Obviously, I think you were throwing them out because there's nothing better to do, but I don't know that, so I kind of still have to count them as misses. But even if they were situations where you kind of knew you were going to miss, but you're just throwing them out anyway, just because there's nothing better to do. If you take those off, you're only taking off about 20 misses or so from the counter. So don't get me wrong, that would improve your stats, but you'd still be missing more than a quarter of your healing, which is still a substantial amount. I'm sorry if I really start to sound like a broken record over the course of this video, but this is just... You've got to sort this out, and I've got to drill it into you. It's just one of those things that's so mundane, it's easy to forget about or think it's not that important. But when you actually look and count and stop and realize, wait, I've missed out on that much value by just not paying attention, you can see, hopefully, I don't have to convince you anymore, this is really bad for you, and it's really easy to fix. Next up is another pet peeve that, once again, I do see in a lot of Kiriko players, not just you, but I can't lie, it winds me up, and I think it's very important that you understand how important it is to kick this habit. I think I really need to drill it into you that Suzu is not a normal ability. Despite just being a 15-second cooldown that is pretty easy to use, Suzu is a single ability capable of countering most ultimate abilities in the entire game, all at the press of a button. While that doesn't necessarily mean you always have to trade Suzu for an ultimate, it's great if it happens, but obviously it's not going to happen every time. What it does mean is you really don't want to be using Suzu in situations where it isn't absolutely necessary. Because to be quite honest, Kiriko without Suzu is a very weak character. Kiriko with Suzu is one of the most broken characters of all time. I think this is part of the reason why Kiriko's power level has always been all over the place in the perception of the community. Because this one cooldown is just such a source of such ludicrous power that the timing and effectiveness of its use basically entirely dictates your value as a Kiriko player. So how do you use Suzu in this first team fight? Well, you use it twice, and I'm going to be completely honest with you. Both times it achieves literally nothing. To start, it looks like you're a little indecisive here and go with the Genji rather than the rest of your team, only to quickly realize actually I kind of don't want to be here because I can't heal my tank, and teleport over to the Venture. But it just so happens when you TP back to your Venture, you kind of hit the jackpot, because Venture was about to get hacked, and now you've just completely screwed the Sombra by appearing out of thin air next to their dive target. Now here's the important part. Regardless of what you actually do after this moment, I want you to ask yourself, what should you do in this situation? There is a Sombra behind that door, but you haven't made eye contact with them yet. You know that they're in that doorway somewhere, but you haven't actually seen them. They have hacked your Venture and dealt a small amount of damage to them. They weren't expecting you to be here, and you suddenly appeared out of thin air next to the target they were about to kill. And none of their other teammates can actually reach you to pressure you because of the fact that the Ramatra is blocking the Zarya, Lucio, and Kiriko from running into the room where you and Venture are. With all this information in mind, what should you do? Just heal Venture. Nothing else. Just keep throwing healing Ofudas at Venture until you feel you can leave them to their own devices and they'll be okay. Then get back to pocketing Ramatra so that he doesn't die on the front line. That is all you need to do. There is no need for a Suzu, there is no need for a TP, although you already kind of had to use it to be here in the first place. There is no need for any kunais. All you have to do is pocket Venture. Because yes, that might mean that the Sombra's going to get away, but you're not killing that Sombra anyway. While you know she's somewhere in that doorway, you haven't seen her yet. By the time you turn the corner to see where her head is so you can try and throw a kunai at it, she'll just translocate away and become invisible. Not only will you not be able to chase her, but even if you could, you wouldn't know where she was. And if you did try to chase her, if anything, it would probably lure you away from your team and you would just get eaten alive in the backline alone. So kunais achieve nothing here, and Suzu achieves nothing but cleansing hack off of Venture, but that's not really important. Venture's not going to die anyway if you just hold heal on him. By just holding right click here, you not only get some ult charge, you not only save your Venture, but you get to keep your Suzu for later, all while maintaining a strong position. But of course, what happens instead? We throw a Suzu at Venture just because we saw they were hacked. Again, what are the actual consequences of being hacked? Well, you can't use your abilities for like 1 second. Well, forgive me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't look like Venture's going to die in the next second, given they're standing next to their tank. There's only one person shooting them, and you're pocketing them, or at least you should be. And Sombra can do slightly increased damage to Venture. Only because Sombra wasn't expecting you to show up, she's probably about to run away anyway. So Cleansing Hack doesn't really achieve anything. Now later, this second Suzu might look a bit more understandable. I mean, obviously you can agree it doesn't achieve anything, you're just about to die, you use it on yourself to live, and then you die anyway. Like, I agree this Suzu didn't achieve much, but literally, what else was I supposed to do? Stand there and just die? However, if you pay attention, no, not everyone is dead. You kind of just left your Genji to go duel the Kiriko alone. You actually could have gotten out of the Zarya's beam by teleporting to your Genji, who is just in that room right in front of you, and that Genji also needed Suzu, so you could throw Suzu at the floor and not only save yourself, but save Genji too, and then 2v1 their Kiriko to take her out. Instead, for some reason, you insist on trying to 1v1 the Zarya that you have no chance of killing, while leaving your Genji to die, meaning that instead of you being able to gang up on the Kiriko and at least maybe take out the Kiriko before the Zarya scoops you and Genji up, and hell, who knows, maybe you and Genji even manage to 2v1 the Zarya. It's a bit optimistic, but it's not impossible. Instead of that world, we now live in the world where it's just, you use Suzu on yourself, and then you just died and achieved nothing, and left Genji to die and achieve nothing. And since they already went through the trouble to count the healing Ofudas, and there's far less Suzus in this game, I also thought I may as well count the Suzus. You threw 6 in total in this game, so not a whole lot, and once again I split them into 3 categories. There's the Suzus that achieve nothing, pretty self-explanatory. The only thing I'll say is, like I mentioned earlier, even if you technically heal with the Suzu or cleanse a debuff, if the debuff didn't need to be cleansed or the character didn't need Suzu to get healed, if it wasn't necessary, I'm still going to count it as a did nothing. Then there's the selfish Suzus, which are pretty self-explanatory. Suzus which aren't great, but in fairness, if you don't use them, you just die, so you may as well use them on yourself. It's more so bad that you are in this position in the first place, but that doesn't mean the wrong response is to Suzu yourself. The right response is to Suzu yourself in most of these situations, it's just, ideally you shouldn't allow yourself to get caught up in these situations in the first place as often as you do. And lastly, of course, are the impactful Suzus. The Suzus that save someone's life, or just generally make something big happen in a team fight that really decides who the winner is. And funnily enough, when I counted them, they are in a very neat order. Your first 2 Suzus do nothing, your next 2 Suzus are selfish, and your next 2 Suzus are both the good Suzus back to back, meaning you have exactly 2 in each category. Technically, this death to Zarya probably looks like it should count as a selfish Suzu, but I'm gonna be a little bit uncharitable here and say, nah, I'm counting this as a did nothing, because the other selfish Suzus, yeah, you still did die afterwards, but there was at least a planet on which you get out and survive after Suzuing yourself. Sure, it didn't happen, but there was a chance that after Suzuing yourself, you could have lived and done something with your life. But with that specific case where you're stuck fighting the Zarya, you can see Suzu not only didn't achieve anything, but there was not even any reality where you had something happen that lets you escape. The fact that both there is a much better Suzu target in Genji, and on top of that, it doesn't even save your life, and there was no chance it was ever going to save your life, means that I'm going to put that one in did nothing. Again, you still die after the other 2 selfish Suzus, but at least in those cases, I feel like there wasn't really a better Suzu target, so you're not making someone else die because of your own selfish decisions, at least not immediately. And although I'd say the second one is a bit sketchy, there's at least a chance you survive in both of these situations, and so it makes sense to play to that out and just hope that you make it out alive. The 2 good Suzus are from team fights from the future I've not covered yet, so this one on the Ramatra we'll get back to later, but I also just wanted to quickly explain this last Suzu. I'm not gonna lie, I really didn't want to count this, but I think I'm gonna be fair and count it as a good Suzu. I didn't want to, first of all, because in fairness, although you do save Genji's life here, it doesn't really have any impact on the team fight. You're so screwed this team fight that even though you saved Genji's life, it still leads to the same result, that everyone dies having not really achieved anything at all. However, I'm gonna be a bit generous and say, well, that's not your fault. The reason this team fight is completely lost, and even with you trying to save Genji's life, there's no turning it around, is because your tank's AFK. If Ramatra's actually here in the fight helping people out, there's a decent chance that saving this Genji here actually could be a team fight winning play. The other reason though that I was pretty hesitant to count this as a good Suzu is, I guess, the more obvious point. Where are you throwing this? Okay, obviously I know what's actually happened here. You've got a bit disorientated with the teleportation, and you're facing the complete opposite direction as to where the Genji actually is. And so when you throw your Suzu, you're actually throwing it away from the Genji rather than towards the Genji. So much so that while editing this video and, you know, preparing to give you this review, I have had to rewatch a lot of these clips, and I rewatched this clip like 6 or 7 times thinking that you missed this Suzu before I finally realized when I had to double check the health bars to confirm that actually the splash radius just barely catches Genji's little pinky toe, and so he just barely gets the Suzu, which unhacks him and gets him to near full health, which is good. But I will say, I don't believe that you were confident that landed. I don't even know if you know that landed. So I would say maybe be a bit careful about where you're throwing your Suzus. With all that said, back to past me. So I want to make it clear before I continue that when I show you this bird's eye view of the team fight, there's going to be a lot of things that you didn't know happened that you're going to be like, oh, I didn't realize that person was there or this was happening. And while to some extent, I will tell you, it would definitely help if you had more awareness of your surroundings, I also want to make it clear that some of these things you literally couldn't have known. Some of them are happening in completely separate rooms, through walls, or nowhere near you, and you would have no way of knowing what's going on. So the point of this isn't for me to sit down and scold you for not having omniscience. It's always good to improve your awareness in Overwatch, and it certainly will improve your chances. But it is still true that being aware of literally everything is usually impossible in most games, even for really good players. As well as that, because I'm going to be talking about literally everything that happens this team fight, not everything is on you. Some of it will be your teammates' fault, but first of all, obviously some of it is still your fault. And the point of this is less to scold you for not knowing immediately in the moment exactly what you needed to do, but rather just to get you thinking, okay, now you know, what should be done differently. So with that said, the other thing I want to say to prepare for this sort of section is a reminder of something that might sound really obvious, but I think that people don't pay attention to it as much as maybe they should sometimes in these games, and it can be surprisingly difficult to notice when it's happening to you. Again, it might sound obvious, but one of the biggest predictors of whether you're going to lose a team fight or not is whether your team gets surrounded. I know it sounds really obvious, I know it's like, well yeah, of course being surrounded is bad, but you might be surprised how often it happens to you and how often you could have done something to stop it. Especially because it's a lot easier to tell when it's happening when you've got a bird's eye view like this, whereas when you're actually in the game, in the match, as one of the playing pieces, it can be really, really hard to tell what's going on. Either way, with that said, I want to show you a little freeze frame here. This is just before the team fight starts proper. You know, there's a little bit of poking going on between the two tanks on the center of the map, but other than that, not much has happened yet. This is kind of where we start the team fight from. And I gotta say, especially for a Gold 5 game, the positions are already interestingly complex. We've got a bit of a situation where the enemy is split up into 2 groups. Their Sombra Tracer on the flank, and their core, as I'm gonna call them, which is their Zarya, Kiriko, Lucio, trying to fight for the center of the map. We've got a bit of an interesting situation here, where at this exact moment, you've managed to encircle the enemy's core, as well as obviously outnumber them. So you're looking good to win this team fight. However, the enemy's flankers, of course, still exist, and they're on their way to sneak round the back, at which point you'll not only no longer have a numbers advantage, but then also you will be the ones who are surrounded and need to be careful. I've got to say, while obviously they don't play perfectly, I'm particularly impressed with this Lucio's positioning, certainly at least for the rank of this lobby. It's quite smart. You wouldn't really have the core surrounded if Lucio wasn't here. He's self-sufficient enough as a cockroach on the wall that they really struggle to kill, that he can just kind of camp up there, and the enemies can't really do much to stop him, and he doesn't even demand many resources or help. But even if he can't realistically kill an enemy from here, at least without getting very lucky, he can still threaten and poke at enemies, forcing out their cooldowns so they can't be used on your teammates, or even potentially, if he gets an opportunity, booping enemies that are trying to retreat back into the fight so they can't get away from your tank so that he can run them over, all while being in the tank's path. so if the tank ever decides to run forward, he'll run into Lucio's speed aura and be able to run over the enemy team.
And I'll be completely honest, I feel really bad for this Lucio and I just want to give him a pat on the back.
Not only because I personally think he contributed more than anyone else in the team in this match, but on top of that, because despite that fact, he kept getting caught in really unlucky situations throughout the game.
And I have to imagine he was not pleased with how this game went, so I just wanted to give him a bit of kudos.
Either way, I would say at this exact snapshot in time, just before the team fight starts proper, I would say both teams are pretty even. It really could go either way from this position. So now I want to give you a few seconds. If you need more time, just pause to think for yourself. Okay, from this position, how do we turn this into a winning team fight? What should we do as a team to win this team fight from this position? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Alright, I would say that all you have to do here is really quite simple. As I mentioned earlier, you outnumber their core and their flankers aren't in position yet. You should take advantage of this numbers advantage while you have it, as well as the positioning advantage. Again, you're going to be surrounded in a moment, but for the here and now, they're the ones that are surrounded and outnumbered. You need to be seizing this moment. So first of all, the tank needs to run it down mid, which they do. The Lucio either has to continue flanking behind the enemies or speeding the tank in so that he can just run them over, whichever one's more appropriate in the context. All you need to do is hard pocket the tank and run in with them, and the DPS either need to come with the tank as well or flank around the side to catch any exits the enemies might try and run for. Now, alternatively, and it might be a little easier now I've explained that, how do you think this turns to a losing team fight? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1? I'm sure you definitely at least said that whether this fight is won or lost is a lot to do with whether the Sombra Tracer gets a kill, but I think the solution you say to that problem is very important. And while it would be nice to simply kill them, that's the bait. The reason this team fight is lost is because you and Venture took the bait. At the exact moment at which everyone needed to be on the front line pushing forward and crushing their core, instead you and Venture took the bait and ran away from the rest of your team to chase a Sombra you never had any chance of killing, baiting you into running into the Tracer's path so that she can just murder you. Now, it does seem like you eventually realize your mistake, but it's kind of a little bit too little too late. Not only have you already baited your Venture into taking this fight now, so now they're just going to be left to die, but on top of that, you could have salvaged this if you did a good enough job pocketing the tank, but once again, you threw more than half your Ofudas into walls, and so your tank didn't actually get much healing. So now he needs a Suzu because you missed so many healing Ofudas. Only, oh wait, we wasted our Suzu on keeping the Venture alive earlier, when we didn't even need to use a Suzu to keep them alive. We could have just thrown healing Ofudas. Not to mention, where's that Venture now? Oh right, dead. And did the Venture achieve anything before they died? No. They didn't kill Sombra, they didn't kill Tracer, they didn't make any space. If anything, they made the team lose space. It might seem a little counterintuitive that if Sombra Tracer is the problem, that we should just ignore them and push forward. You would think, well, if something's a problem, we should just go kill it and deal with the problem, right? But the thing with Sombra Tracer is, they're faster than you and slipperier than you. You're not catching them. Not unless you see them make a really big mistake, or you know something they don't and you can use that knowledge against them to surprise them or kill them before they can react. But especially in a more close quarters grouped together team like this, chasing the Sombra Tracer is exactly what the Sombra Tracer want you to do. If you chase them, you run away from the rest of the team, which means they don't have the teeth they need to crush the core, which means they're going to have someone to retreat to after the fight is over, which is bad for you. It means that you give up the point and give up map control as well, running after them. And let's be real, it usually means you're gonna die. Meanwhile, what happens if you literally just ignore the Sombra Tracer and run in with your tank, especially if you keep your Lucio speed? What happens is you outrun the Sombra Tracer. Because the backline is no longer at the back, in fact it almost doesn't exist, the backline just decided to go next to the tank and run in with them, there's no easy target for them to engage on. Everyone's all clumped together and everyone ran away from them. Now don't get me wrong, is Sombra Tracer fast enough to catch up to you? Yeah, if they really wanted to, they could use all their blinks or use a translocator to jump into the middle of your team and try and take someone out. The thing about that though, is they wouldn't have any buttons to get away afterwards. And considering there would be 5 of you all in one big group and 2 of them, because you've just finished crushing the core, it's not very likely to work out for them. The most likely thing that will happen if they actually try to chase you here is that they would die being too aggressive and having no escape plan. A big reason why I really want to give you this bird's eye perspective.
is not just to show you how important it is to be aware of your positioning and figure out how you actually win team fights rather than just kind of existing in the moment. It's also because one of the most consistent things I see from people who seem to be stuck at a lower rank and sending in VODs and asking for help is that a lot of the times you can kind of tell by the way they play, they just exist in the moment. They don't plan ahead, they don't think about what the enemies might want to do and what they can do to respond to that. You just kind of exist and do the obvious thing in every situation, regardless of whether the obvious thing is actually the correct thing. If someone is damaged and needs healing, you will heal them, but only if they're right in your face and there isn't a wall in the way. If there is, you won't bother, or you'll throw a bunch of Ofudas into the wall. You'll throw kunais, but not necessarily when it's actually appropriate, just generally when you see a scary enemy, you kind of just throw kunais everywhere. Even if it's actually a very bad time to be throwing kunais. Even then, there could be situations where maybe it's a bad time to throw kunais, but you could salvage it by picking the right target. But the right target's not usually the easiest target. However, a lot of the times you just pick whichever target is right in your face to shoot at. And it's a little bit hard to see why that's a bad thing at first. It does seem obvious that the right thing to do should be to throw kunais at the enemy in your face when all you see the game from is your own perspective. But again, when you get this zoomed out bird's eye view, you get a better idea of why it's not a smart idea. Your tendency to just kind of attack whatever appears in your face and hit buttons is what led both you and Venture to take the bait and lose the team fight for everyone else. Now don't get me wrong, the second that you and Venture make the mistake of chasing that Sombra, that was probably the most critical mistake in this team fight, but that wasn't even the point where your fate was sealed. You could have caught yourself here. The first and most pathetic one, to be frank, is that if you just didn't miss more than half your healing Ofudas, your tank doesn't die here. So that could have been a pretty big impact. But on top of that, once your tank hits critical, you know what you should be doing, right? You should be throwing a Suzu at them, but we already went over this, didn't we? You don't have Suzu because you wasted it. I already kind of explained the issue with this, so I won't go over it again. But this is just another point where you could have salvaged the team fight if you made some different decisions. Now again, just like I said, you gotta get in the habit of slapping yourself whenever you throw 10 Ofudas into a wall. Similarly, I think you gotta get in the habit of slapping yourself whenever you realize, hang on, I actually did literally nothing with that Suzu. Don't get me wrong, everyone makes mistakes from time to time. Even I sometimes do a Suzu and a few seconds later I'm like, oh wait, that actually didn't do anything. Oh my god. So it's not about shaming you for even having made the mistake once, but you've got to build the habit of not just shrugging and going, my Suzu did nothing, that's not my fault. I'm not even saying that you necessarily do that, but I have to assume you do just because I do feel like the game's not very good at this. You know, it doesn't really give you that negative feedback that you've made a mistake. As a result, if you're not careful when policing yourself, it can be hard to tell when you've made a mistake, and that means you fall into bad habits. And once you start falling into them, it can be really hard to break them. If you make a bad habit of just throwing Suzus willy-nilly and never really realizing when actually it cost you a team fight, then it really impairs your ability to improve at Kiriko. So it might seem at first like, well, I cleansed Hack, I healed my Venture, who wasn't full HP, that's not a bad Suzu, right? But once again, did you need to cleanse Hack? No. Did you need to heal Venture? Yeah, but healing Ofuda would have healed them just as much as Suzu and wouldn't have used your most powerful cooldown. And if the goal was to keep Venture alive, which again, you didn't even need Suzu for, but let's just assume for a second you actually did need Suzu to keep Venture alive, then my next question would be, okay, so what did that achieve? What did Venture do with the life you gave them in this team fight? Venture took a 2v1 and lost. I'm not gonna lie, I don't remember off the top of my head right now, but I don't even think they did any damage to the Sombra Tracer, so they didn't even get any ult charge. They just fed the enemy's ult charge. Your Suzu kind of literally achieved nothing, or even arguably worse than nothing. And again, part of that is down to the Venture making their own stupid decisions, but you can't really blame them for that when not only do you kind of bait them into it by giving them the Suzu to tell them, hey, I'm giving you your abilities back because I want you to use them, and also you kunaiing the, Sombra, which kind of signals to them, hey, help me kill this Sombra. But on top of that, even if you didn't bait them into it, even if they were going to do it anyway, you made the same mistake, so, Anyway, either way, sorry, I know you get the point. That wasn't a good Suzu, but the reason I'm driving it in is what if you had Suzu now instead? What if instead of you throwing away that Suzu 11 seconds ago, you have Suzu right here, right now? Now, you might think to yourself, well, that would be better, Like, my tank would definitely live a little bit longer, but I don't know. I feel like my tank's just running it down mid. I feel like he's being super aggressive. I feel like he's just running in without a plan. He hasn't been aware of anything that's been happening behind him. He's just continued to push in. So I feel like he would just die anyway. Besides, we don't outnumber them anymore. It's a 3v3 over here at the moment. And yeah, that might be true, but for one, unfortunately, it is kind of your and Venture's fault that it is a 3v3 in the first place. It would be a 5v3 if you didn't take the bait. But on top of that, once again, let's take a second to pause and look at this from a bird's eye perspective. Would you look at that? For as scuffed as this scenario is, you've actually achieved a very advantageous position. As much as it's not nice that the Sombra Tracer are ganging up on your poor Lucio, who had no idea what he was jumping into when he jumped back to help the Venture, but aside from that, you've achieved complete map control. You have control of the entire central arena, and you have crammed the enemy team against a wall in the corner with no escape. This is a devastatingly domineering position. You should win from this position. The only way you lose is if you just kind of let your tank fall over, which is kind of what you did, both by wasting Suzu and missing your healing Ofudas. Now, this point where your Amatra dies is basically the point where it's like, okay, this is basically unwinnable now without a miracle. But just because the team fight is unwinnable doesn't mean you might not be able to take someone out with you. You're probably dying here unless you somehow manage to slip away, but at the very least, you can get out with your life if you get lucky, or you can take someone down from the enemy team with you, both getting some ult charge in the process, and at least making it so that when you come to recontest in the next team fight, the enemies are one player down. So to recap, who's left? Well, your Lucio somehow actually kind of won the 2v1. He actually managed to kill the Sombra while being attacked by both her and Tracer, and in response, the Tracer just runs away and the Lucio plays for his life. So to start, you could actually just TP over to Lucio. He's just barely out of TP range, but if you started running in that direction, I think you could reach him before you die. Unfortunately, it seems that you weren't aware that Lucio went back there, which I would understand if you didn't see it happen, but it did happen right in front of you, so you might need to pay a bit more attention there. But yeah, it seems that you don't think to TP away for a while, and once you do think to TP away, you've not considered the fact that you've moved too far away from the Lucio to TP, and so you can't get out. So, okay, that isn't perfect, but okay, we can still kind of salvage this. Don't get me wrong, 99% chance you're dead here, but again, you could at least maybe take someone out with you. Don't forget, your Genji's still here. Your Genji's still fighting. It's just your Genji doesn't want to fight the Zarya that's pocketed by the enemy Kiriko, not only because Zarya can beam him through his deflect, but also because Genji can't even kill her. She's got too much HP and it's regenerating faster than he can deal damage. Meanwhile, the Kiriko, who is isolated from her Zarya by being hidden in this little side room, is a perfect target for the Genji to go for, especially because he's actually capable of deflecting her kunai. And once the Genji goes to attack this Kiriko, I'm not gonna lie, I usually don't, use TP to go such a short distance, but I'm not kidding. I think it's literally worth it to just TP into that room with the Genji, even though it's right there. Not only does it get you out of the Zarya beam, but it also means you can pocket the Genji or throw kunais at the Kiriko, either one. Both of them would be valuable, and both of them would give you a great chance of being able to 2v1 the Kiriko while the Zarya can't see her to bubble her, and then actually take out the Kiriko. Who knows, if you manage to kill the Kiriko, maybe you even get to 2v1 the Zarya. Don't get me wrong, the Zarya is full charge, so she probably will kill you both, but it's at least not a lost cause. There's actually a chance you could kill the Zarya. And if you kill the Zarya, who knows? Maybe from there, you actually manage to get out with your life. It's a long shot, but it's possible. And even if you do die, worst case scenario, you took out the Kiriko before you died. That's at least something. The worst thing you could do right now is do nothing to help your Genji and play only for your own life when you're just screwed already. And, well, that's kind of exactly what you do. You try to duel the Zarya, who you're never going to kill. It's not even a skill issue, it's literally just they have bigger numbers than you. You ignore your critical health Genji attacking the much smarter target, and then you use the Suzu you could have used to save your Genji's life instead on saving your own life for all of about 2 seconds. So, okay, yeah, I'm gonna acknowledge that was all a little bit harsh, but also very true, and I think important to drill in. Again, if I have to blame any one person here, don't worry, I wouldn't say you were literally the worst player here. I think the worst player was the Venture. I think they literally contributed less than nothing to the team fight. At least you achieved some healing. but I'm not gonna lie, I do think you were a close second here. The Genji does play this a little slow, and he does take a long route around, but he does eventually take the flank, and it does pay off. Not to mention, he does attack the right targets when he needs to be on the attack. The Ram, at other points in this game, seems to make some very stupid plays and appears to be lagging because at points he runs into walls, but thankfully for him, his job was simple here. All he had to do was run it down mid and get help from his supports. So I'm not necessarily saying that Ramatra was a skilled and genius player, but in this one team fight, his job was simple and he did it. He didn't really make a big misplay here. And your Lucio honestly really played this perfectly. Again, the only misplay he made was going back to help the Venture, but he had no idea what was going on. I think it's completely understandable that he would have thought, wait, my teammates aren't with me. Maybe I should go check on them. It was just unfortunate timing that it happened to be the wrong decision. So I know we spent a while on this, but that's a pretty thorough summary of basically everything that happens in this first team fight. And I know this is just one team fight, but it already says a lot. Having this one team fight to work with now means that we can be a bit quicker when talking about other team fights and what went wrong. Because from here, honestly, it gets a bit simpler. In fact, this kind of ties in, but one last thing I do have to throw in just before I leave this team fight and move on to the next one. You really gotta stop throwing kunais. Well, no, not necessarily. Obviously, there's situations where you need to throw kunais, but there are very few times you threw kunais in this first team fight where it actually made sense. First, you throw kunais randomly down mid when you don't even know where the enemies are, and so naturally you miss every one. At this point in time, you should be healing your tank, but you're out of position, so you have to burn a teleport to correct yourself. So this was a bad time to be throwing kunais. Like I said earlier, when you Suzu the Venture, instead of continuing to heal them like you should have, you instead immediately start trying to throw kunais at a Sombra when you don't know where she is because you haven't turned the corner yet. And so naturally, you don't hit any of them. Again, this isn't even, oh, you're so bad at aiming. This is, that would be pretty hard to hit that shot. You should probably think a bit more about when you should try shooting things, because it's probably a bit easier to shoot them when you actually know where they are. Even this here, I think I can see what's going on here. I think you were trying to line up a kunai shot but got your wires crossed and ended up throwing healing Ofudas instead. And I just have to say, first of all, your tank is critical and you're missing all your healing Ofudas. You really should just focus on landing your healing, not trying to land kunais. Second of all, there's the obvious fact that they're behind the wall, but I'm guessing that's why you didn't end up throwing the kunais, is because you expected them to come out from behind there, but they didn't. But lastly, and most importantly, what would throwing kunais achieve here? Let's even just say you get really lucky and you land nothing but headshots. By the time you've thrown your second kunai, your tank's dead. The absolute best case scenario here is maybe you get to take out one of their supports as your tank dies if you literally perfectly double headshot 2 kunais in a row. In which case, you still have to deal with a full charge Zarya who still has one support pocketing them, and you don't have a tank anymore. So you probably just die. In this entire team fight, every single time you were throwing kunais was a time you should have been throwing healing Ofudas except one. And that was when you died. But even then, I can't give you the credit, because you shouldn't be throwing kunais at the Zarya, you should be throwing kunais at the Kiriko that your Genji's trying to kill. Okay, sorry, I couldn't let that one slip. I just realized I nearly moved on for this team fight without bringing that up. With all that said, on to the next one. The next team fight is also a pretty quick one. Lucio actually survived the last team fight. If you remember, he took the 2v1 with the Sombra Tracer and actually kinda won. Meanwhile, everyone else sort of gets there in their own pace and you're the last one to arrive. And unfortunately, that makes you a ripe target for the Sombra Tracer. Not really your fault as well. You see, I'm actually going to let off the gas a little bit here. I think this team fight in particular is you suffering the consequences of your teammates' misplays more so than misplaying yourself. You still could have played it better, but honestly, a lot of the improvements you would make would probably just slightly improve your chances of survival. You're still probably dying here. So first up, Tracer tries to eat you alive, and you try throwing a kunai, but once again, you don't have time to react. It doesn't land. That's fine. You very quickly realize, hang on a minute, no, the smart thing here isn't to throw kunais. The smart thing here is to get behind this wall and force her to come in here to fight me. That makes it easier to land kunais because it's closer quarters, and it puts me closer to my teammates. You do that and you're prepared to Suzu yourself, but I'll even give credit here, while I don't like Suzuing yourself here, you do at least make sure to run to your Genji first before doing it. Now, he doesn't really need Suzu, but it's the thought that counts, I guess. It's a little bit better to at least catch Genji with the Suzu too, in case, I don't know, maybe Tracer throws out a pulse bomb, but because you Suzu'd Genji, it goes right through him and he lives. It's not likely, but it's a nice little contingency. However, you'll see why I think Suzuing yourself is still a misplay here, because very quickly you realize this really hasn't solved anything, and the real thing you need to do is TP away. Now, you're a bit slow to do this, and again, you shouldn't have used Suzu before TPing. You should TP first and then see if you need a Suzu after that. But ultimately, I don't want to be too harsh here because I do think the most important thing you need to do here is TP in to where your tank is. And that is basically what you do. You TP on Reaper rather than Ramatra, but it's close enough. So in this case, I'm not here to be hypercritical. You generally did the right thing, and you could have done a couple things better. You could have kept your crosshair more steadily at head level, making sure to mostly move it left and right and not shake it up and down so much, and that might have given you a better chance at shooting the Tracer. You could have saved your Suzu for later, you could have TP'd sooner, and you could have TP'd on Ramatra rather than Reaper, but honestly, all of these are nitpicks. Because to be honest, if you do all these things correctly, I think you have a better chance of surviving, but I still think you're more likely to die than make it out of this alive. And the main reason why is because of this baffling blunder from your tank. Suddenly, out of nowhere, when he's just about to have the enemy team right where he wants him, he gives up the fight on the front line, making it much harder for the DPS to pick off the remaining enemies, even if they've got them cornered. He then decides to run back, abandoning the fight, to instead run to point and stand on it to capture it. Now, don't get me wrong, yeah, it's good to have point. But in case you weren't aware, you really shouldn't give up a fight that's happening near the point just to take the point. Not unless it's literally a, if I don't take the point right now, we lose the game scenario, or you're in a position where your character is just out of resources and can't do anything right now, so you may as well just stand on point. In this case, Ramatra is very important and is very much capable of doing things, but instead chooses to burn most of his Nemesis form just running back to point. This is already not great in its own right, but it would only be a small blunder in most cases. The real problem is, on the way back, he literally runs past the Sombra Tracer that's after you, and just goes, not my problem. So yeah, I will say, I do blame this Ramatra for your death here much more than you. He should have had your back, and instead, he just thought, I'll just sacrifice my DPS and my supports for point. And you can see why that's a bad idea in action here. Because if Ramatra kept pushing here, we could have once again crushed their core and put the flankers into a 2v5, where now they've committed onto the Kiriko, but they've lost the rest of their team. We can just 5v2 them, and they don't have the mobility to run away because they already burned it all to chase Kiriko. It would be a guaranteed team fight win, and then you would not only get the point, but, you know, keep it. But because Ramatra decided to ditch the fight too early, he caused everyone to lose the team fight in exchange for getting, what, like 10% capture on the point, only to lose it again immediately. This is why it's important to finish off the team fight you're doing to take point, or at least get a strong level of control over the surrounding area near point before you just go take point and ignore everything else going on. So yeah, this is not on you, this is on Ramatra. And maybe there's a bit of an argument to say your DPS probably should have turned around and paid attention to what's happening behind them, but in fairness, they also have a lot happening in front of them that's also pretty important. So I'm not sure if I would say that. As for the following fight, I hesitate to even call it a team fight. At this point, you're pretty staggered. Everyone's trickling in one by one. And for the most part, it's a simple story of people running in without a plan and getting outnumbered. Not a whole lot to analyze or say. Actually, I do have to say this. For the love of God, stop AFKing. I can only assuming the best that you're typing here, but I just want to point out, it might not seem like much, but your Lucio dies here because you don't get back fast enough. You easily could have TP'd and Suzu'd him and saved him if you didn't spend like half a minute standing in spawn doing nothing. And again, the main problem here is you're staggered, so saving someone's life so the team can regroup would be a pretty big deal. Beyond that, there's just a whole bunch of typical throwing Suzus and Ofudas into walls and floors rather than at your teammates, and a whole lot of very delayed reactions to things happening right in front of you. You die again and respawn, and I'm going to count this as the same section because this is still the mess of staggering that's still happening. When you come back, just about everyone's dead, again, and it's mostly just Ramatra and Reaper up on the front line trying to fight against the enemies. You hear Ramatra get grabbed, and you hear Ramatra pop ult. You can't clearly see what's going on, but you want to TP to him to help him. This is a risky play, but I will say I actually like it. You have your Suzu, and while this Ramatra probably shouldn't have popped ult here, you can probably also get a lot of value if he gets a Suzu here, which you can grant him. Obviously, the more people that Ramatra has around him when he pops ult, the more value he can get off of it. And he is surrounded by enemies all over the place. As long as he doesn't explode, he is going to get big value off of this ult, and because you have Suzu, you can guarantee he doesn't explode. So while I think it is risky to go for this TP, knowing that there are going to be a lot of enemies there and you don't know what they're going to be doing and how much they're going to have available to kill you with, I think the payout is high enough that I like taking this risk. But while I commend you for doing this and making sure that you definitely locked on to Ramatra rather than Reaper, it's very easy here to accidentally TP to Reaper, but you made sure the crosshair was on Ramatra. I know that sounds like a small thing, but you'd be surprised how often people fall for that. Hell, I still do that sometimes. I like that, But then after you TP and throw Suzu, what should you do? You throw some healing Ofudas and you turn around behind you. Because in front of you, you can only see Zarya, and you know there is more than one enemy. Where are the other enemies? Look behind you, find out, and try and play for your life. Ramatra just needed Suzu. He can finish off the Zarya himself. Just make sure you don't get picked here now. What do we do instead? We don't look behind us, and we throw Kunais at Zarya. At the very least, if you're not going to bother looking behind you, just hold heal on Ramatra. He's got this. He doesn't need you to kunai the Zarya to help. He just needs you to make sure he doesn't die. In case you were wondering, there was not only a Kiriko, but also a Tracer behind you. You're actually kind of lucky in that the Tracer didn't seem to be paying attention and didn't notice that you were there, so they just kind of leave. But the Kiriko does notice you and also notices that you have no idea what's going on behind you, so she just kunais you from the back and you don't turn around. I know it might sound small or it might sound like a very nebulous thing, but seriously, I think just working on your general awareness of what's even going on will do wonders for you. Now, for as much as I feel like you really didn't need to take this death, at the end of the day, I still got to commend you for making the right decision in Suzuing your Ramatra, because as messy as this play is, and as much as this probably wasn't the perfect time to hit Nemesis form, Annihilation, the ultimate, the fact that they managed to use it here and not die thanks to your Suzu does mean that we do in fact go on to win the team fight despite how messy it was and take the point. Now, what I don't like is by the time you come back and you've taken the point, you are lost for this entire interaction. At the very least, I know it's simple, but it is good that you will climb up here and take high ground. That being said, I have to say, you are Kiriko. You can teleport. It's like one of the main things your character does. The main advantage of being able to play Kiriko is that you can kind of put yourself on literally any angle, no matter how stupid or greedy, and get away with it, because you literally just have a button that immediately teleports you to somewhere else. That being, as long as there is a teammate that is in fact somewhere else, but still in range. In situations like this, where the fight hasn't broken out yet and everyone's full HP, I would much rather you be taking the right side high ground where no one is, because while in this case the enemies don't take it, you have no way of knowing that. For all you know, they might all be sneaking up there, and before you know it, all the enemies have high ground, because literally no one even tried to contest them. And don't get me wrong, if you're alone up there, can you do a whole lot? Probably not. But at the very least, you can provide a bit of a warning, drive them off, and TP back to safety when you can't stay there any longer. That gives your team a bit of a heads up about what's about to happen, and who knows, if you get lucky, you might get a pick and just get a lucky couple kunais and kill one of their supports or something before you TP out. As well as that, even in the world that exists here, where the enemies all push down main, the fact that you're not just clumped with the rest of your team would mean that the EMP wouldn't hit your entire team. Everyone else would get EMP'd, but you could TP in and maybe Suzu someone to save them. In fact, if people grouped up more, you maybe could Suzu everyone and save everyone. Now, with all that said, I am nitpicking a little bit. This was also just a team fight you were kind of likely to use anyway, because the enemies just used EMP and Kitsune Rush. It may only be 2 ults, but they're 2 of the strongest ults in the game used in combination. This is mostly a situation where you probably do just lose this team fight, and there's probably not a whole lot you can do. But at the very least, you could maybe try and make yourself not such an easy target. Again, by huddling up, you have no TP target, you make their EMP juicier, and it would at least make sense if you needed to huddle up to keep your team alive, but your team is full HP at the time that you're huddling up with them. In fact, you keep trying to find people that you can heal, but you can't find anyone. And that's actually part of the reason why you seem to get a bit lost, is because you get distracted trying to chase people to heal them, and not actually pay attention to what's happening right in front of you. Also, I know I keep bringing it up, but please stop throwing the Ofudas at walls and the floor. Honestly, the following team fight's also pretty uneventful. Well, I say that, this is kind of funny. Listen, already Wraith forming directly onto the point as Reaper alone and then hitting ult as if that would actually surprise anyone is a hilarious move. But doing that to a Zarya and a Lucio who have Bubble and Boop is even funnier. Yeah, that was not a smart move from your Reaper. Unfortunately, your Lucio and Genji tried to follow up, only to realize, wait, that did nothing. Wait, we're 2v5. Wait, oh no. And this whole time, your Ramatra is presumably disconnecting an AFK in the back, or he's typing. I really hope he's not typing. Not to mention, this happens to your poor Lucio. I had to watch this back because I didn't understand how the hell a fucking gold 5 Tracer managed to stick Pulse on this Lucio. But when I look back, I saw that they were actually aiming for the Genji, and this Lucio's just really unlucky. The poor guy. So yeah, I've not got as much to say about you here specifically, just because, to be fair, this is kind of a lost cause, mostly because of your tank not being there and your Reaper just doing something. That being said, I mean, I won't let you off the hook completely. Once again, you seem really lost. And once again, you're making it harder than it needs to be to shoot this Tracer. This should be a golden opportunity to get a kunai headshot. But once again, I feel like you're moving your crosshair up and down too much. You just want to get it to about head level and focus on moving it sideways more than jerking it up and down. You're making your shots harder than they need to be by doing that. At the very least, I like the melee. But yeah, the rest of this seems a little bit messy from your part, but not the worst. And to end it off, we got probably the worst point, the last point, where the stomp just really kicks in. At least the first couple points, there was a little bit of back and forth. This is just a complete stomp. And this is also the point where you swap Moira. And I'm not gonna lie, there might be a bit of a correlation there. I'm not about to say that your team played this one perfectly, definitely not. But I gotta say, the Moira is a bit of a disappointing showing. Now, part of that is for the obvious reason that, let's be real, you didn't swap Moira because you actually thought Moira was a better pick here. You swapped Moira because you didn't like getting dove, didn't you? I know it, you know it, we all know it. You didn't swap Moira because Moira was a good pick. You swapped Moira because you were pissed that you kept getting attacked and you wanted to have Fade. Which, you know what? Fair enough if you think you can actually do something with the ability to escape the people who are diving you. The problem is, you kind of just don't do anything on Moira. I mean, I'm sorry to be a little harsh, but it's just kind of the truth. I mean, I don't know how often you've played Moira, but it's painfully obvious you don't know what you're doing on this character here, and that honestly you've made it even worse by swapping to her. Don't get me wrong, Moira's probably slightly better than Kiriko at outrunning flankers, but with Suzu, TP, and wall climb, as well as having the smallest hitbox out of all supports, I'm pretty sure Kiriko's already about the best you're going to get when it comes to escaping flankers, and if you're struggling to live on Kiriko, Moira probably won't make it much better. Again, that would be fine if you actually knew what you were doing on Moira, but man, it looks like you're really not comfortable on this character. You start off by trying to wall climb when you can't wall climb on Moira. You try to contest the point from this massive open angle when Moira thrives in close quarters, and this is like the #1 spot in the entire map you do not want to be as Moira, and for some reason you keep playing from it. You refuse to play from anywhere else. Your tank tries to push in from the side, which while it's not great that he's alone, in terms of just pure positioning, this is a much better place to try and take the point from, not only for him, but also for you. So you should really be with him right now, but you're not because you haven't been paying attention. Instead, you're with your Cass. Now, it would be ideal if you were all together up there, but honestly, the Cass being here isn't too bad because Cass can actually do something from this angle. He can use the openness of it to his advantage. You can't, so you really shouldn't be here, honestly. You need to be where Ramatra is right now. You need to be pushing the enemies out of that little area and onto the bridge where the Cass can just shoot them freely because they have no cover. And in fairness, I think you eventually realize this, but it's just way too little, way too late. Because you try and go up this sort of boxes to get to the Ramatra to heal him before he dies, but you need to be thinking about these things before they happen. You don't have time to save him once it's already too late. You have to think in advance, where's my tank pushing in from? Because I think he's going to need healing. Oh, he's over there. Because Moira's healing is so short-ranged, you need to either already be with him or be prepared to fade to him at a moment's notice. You can't just be doing whatever you like, and then when you see someone hit critical, be like, oh, hang on a minute, let me trek my way over there. Oh, you're dead, my bad. Not to mention, why did you throw a damage orb here? Not a healing orb? For your sake, I'll just put that one down as a misinput. But you get my point. Not to mention, once all your teammates start getting picked off and you're basically the only one left alive, it takes you way too long to realize that what you need to be doing right now is run away, not keep picking fights. The second your Ram died, you need to be fading out the left side immediately. And you start going left, but then you decide, actually, no, I'm going to keep fighting. Actually, wait, no, I don't want to keep fighting. Actually, no, I'm going to fade out. Oops, I hit the ceiling. Oops, I'm dead. Lastly, on Moira, this is a bit of a harder one to solidly define, but I get the feeling that you just just throw out mobs. You're not really waiting for the best time to use them, you're just waiting for them to come off cooldown and then throwing them wherever. Now I say that a couple of these honestly aren't too bad. Definitely the first mob, I mean, it could be better, but it's not bad. I probably would throw a healing one for your tank rather than a damaging one, but I get it, it's not a terrible mob. This is a bit of a tougher point because in fairness, I do think one of the most important things you need to be doing right now as Moira is farming ult charge so you can build a quick coalescence so that you have a chance to take the point and use an ultimate before the game is over. But honestly, do you want to know how you farm ult charge as fast as possible? Don't get me wrong, AoE damage is good, but you know what's even better? AoE heals. If you could group up your teammates, which I understand isn't completely in your control, but if you could at least try to play more grouped up, and you could throw healing orbs that catch multiple allies at once, if you could focus more on the AoE healing, you would farm coalescence extremely quick. Nothing in this game farms ult charge faster than AoE healing. In fact, fun fact if you didn't know, Lucio has the single most expensive ultimate in the game. And yet it doesn't feel like it, does it? It doesn't feel like Lucio's ult is the slowest charging in the game. Well, the reason why it feels like it charges at a relatively regular speed, despite being the most expensive ultimate in the game by far, is because Lucio always AoE heals if he does heal. And so it doesn't feel like his ultimate really takes that long. A similar thing with Brig. Obviously, it's a little bit less consistent, but when you have games on Brig where your Inspire is always up and always healing, you can farm Rally stupidly fast. So, how would I like to summarize? It's a bit of a tough one because there's so much going on here, but I think the best thing I could say is, while there's plenty of criticism I can give you here and plenty of things to improve on, I can understand if it seems overwhelming, all the stuff I'm throwing at you. So if it does, I want you to just remember this. I think the most important thing is you just need to get the basics down. It seems like you're constantly making things harder for yourself by not even knowing where you want to be playing from before the match even starts, by not paying attention to where your teammates are and where they're going, so then when you need to know where they are to TP to them, you don't know where they are and you get lost. And by, as I said, not investing any mental energy into actually aiming your heals, you end up throwing all of them into the floors or wall. Don't get me wrong, being able to land kunais is nice. Don't get me wrong, knowing how to flank is nice. Don't get me wrong, being able to yeet a mid-air Suzu to save your Genji at the last second or something like that is really useful if you can do it. But the most important thing you need to get down is just the easy stuff. Just be aware of your surroundings. Don't miss enemies that are standing right next to you just because they're fast. If you struggle to follow things on the screen as much, try and use sound. Almost everything in the game makes sound. Sound will help tip you off to a lot of things that are happening that you couldn't have physically been able to see. But yeah, definitely the easiest thing, the thing that I think is probably the most important to focus on. At the very least, if you struggle with all this other stuff, get this down. Just hit your heals. I know it seems like a dumb thing to say, but like, I do not believe that you're missing this much because you can't do it. You simply don't invest any mental energy into trying. And you really, really should. With all that said, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.